in on housing tonight because it is such a huge issue, and I have some fast facts that I wanted to read about just why we are focusing on this. If you feel like we are at a tipping point in terms of the housing crisis here in West Michigan, you are not wrong. As per the National Low Income Housing Center, the state of Michigan ranks in the bottom half, number 31, for the highest housing wage. Okay, we've got a lot of housing experts in the audience here tonight. But to qualify for this, a worker making minimum wage, which currently sits at $10.33 an hour, would have to work 72 hours a week to afford even a modest one-bedroom rental home at fair market rent. 72 hours a week. NLIHC research additionally shows that the Grand Rapids, Wyoming area, we are the second most expensive housing area in the entire state of Michigan. Housing Kent has published several key performance indicators relating to housing stability in the region. We are so grateful for their work. The most significant that stood out to me was that home value growth in Kent County has grown by 126% of the value, right? I'm sorry if I'm taking some of your talking points, but but the worker wage growth has only grown by 26%. So housing prices up by 126%, wages are not keeping pace at only a 26% increase. So if you feel like we are at a housing crisis, it's not in your mind, it is borne out in the data, and in many respects, it's even worse than what we thought. So again, tonight we are focusing specifically on housing. Across West Michigan, we are seeing troubling numbers. We know that an entry-level home in our region now costs $205,000 and requires an income of about $62,000 a year, but the median wage here is closer to $42,000. Frankly, renters are paying on average about $400 more each month than they can afford, and this is not what we were promised. I'm not afraid to get slightly political here. I will hold any leader of a party accountable when they don't deliver on what they promised. And we all heard President Trump promised to lower cost day one, and that is far from what is happening, right? We're seeing soaring energy prices right now because of a war halfway around the world that no one asked for. That's also going to increase the cost of building a new home. Also, deeply troubling is we are trying to address this in the United States Congress. The 21st Century Road to Housing Act, many of you are familiar, it is a bipartisan piece of legislation. It is not the perfect silver bullet to fix all of our housing woes, but it has some really, really good pieces of policy in it. The Senate passed this piece of legislation, but President Trump has currently threatened that he is not going to sign any new legislation, including this, into law until the United States Congress passes the SAVE Act, which is a voter suppression bill, deeply unpopular, right? Over 60% of Americans do not support the SAVE Act. They don't want it signed into law, and yet, the president is saying, we're not going to move on housing legislation until I get this pet piece of policy done. So, this bill it's dangerous. It, increases voter suppression, and the president shouldn't be holding our housing legislation hostage just to get it done. So, I have tackled several pieces of critical legislation that can address some of the work, some of the needs that we know are facing West Michigan. The Unlocking Affordable Housing Act, which would make it easier to build new housing near transit hubs where people already live and work. The Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which expands the low-income housing tax credit to help finance more affordable homes. And we are here joined tonight by experts across West Michigan who are going to engage us in a conversation about how we got here and how we fix it. And then we're going to turn it over to you all And Catherine said, you know, absolutely, we're going to hear from you on your questions, but I also want to hear your comments. We specifically reached out to so many of you, asking you to join us tonight for this conversation because you are experts in your own right, and we want to hear your comments. The vast majority of my bill ideas have come from conversations with constituents about what's wrong with our policy and how we can fix it. So that's what tonight is all about, and I want to introduce you to our incredible panelists. We are so proud to be joined by Eric Brown, President and CEO. We'll go in order down the list. President and CEO of the Urban League of West Michigan. Eric is a visionary leader and a fierce advocate for racial justice with deep experience in community development and equitable economic growth. Eureka People, President of Housing Kent. Eureka brings an extensive background in operations and community development. Her leadership brings both clarity and compassion to our understanding of the housing crisis in West Michigan. Jacob Horner, Chief Real Estate Development Officer at Dwelling Place. Jacob brings extensive experience in leveraging capital resources to build quality, community-based housing, particularly for income-restricted renters in our community. And last but certainly not least, Kevin Einfeld, builder and developer and founder of BDR Custom Homes, who brings decades of experience in construction and development and a critical perspective on what it takes to build housing in today's market. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to the conversation. Can you help me give a round of applause to our panelists here? Thank you. Okay, let me make sure I'm on the right page here. Okay, so we are going to go to Eric first. Apologize, I'm not. Do we have the questions in here too? Here we go, sorry. Eric, we're starting with you. Feel free to start off talking a little bit about your work, but dive into this question. Creating more affordable housing is an all hands on deck effort. We have, I want to understand from you how you feel that we have gotten to this place historically, and how have past laws, federal and local, gotten us to a place where we have such disparities, particularly racial disparities, when it comes to housing affordability and ownership.
Well, thank you for the invitation tonight. Thank you for being here. I feel honored to be on the panel with yourself as well as the rest of my colleagues. Urban League of West Michigan has been around for 83 years, advocating in our community, and one of our founding pillars is housing. We do a lot of work in the housing space. I won't share all that with you. I have colleagues of mine. We do have a resource table out there to learn a little bit more about what the Urban League does, specifically in housing. But one of those things is we do advocate. And to your question about how did we get here with these disparate outcomes, I think if I ask for a raise of hands who've heard about redlining, I just want to, you always want to frame. We always start there as far as how we got here, but I'm going to go back just a little further, and I won't be long, but what redlining did was organize and federalize and institutionalize practices that were happening already around the country. If we think about that time, Great Migration, black and brown folks were moving from the South, they're moving up north up north. We had discrimination going on up north, close to Chicago, and guess what? Right here, even in Grand Rapids. With exclusionary zoning policies, discriminatory practices around what zoning and things like that. Places like Chicago, where they got into things which is famous for having starting cash, what they call land contracts, cash contracts, and those type of things. We don't have time to go all in depth, but I just wanted you guys to know that those things were existed. I mean, in case of discriminations across the country throughout redlining, as we understand, as we know, is where these maps were created that coded the various sections and neighborhoods of communities. Grand Rapids was one of the over 200 communities. If you had over 440,000 people, you got in this red line thing, and that prevented primarily folks of color from owning homes. And we know in our country, owning homes is the #1 wealth creation and all those type of things. How did it do that? As we know, is because it allowed those, if the community was deed or red, you couldn't insure it. But people weren't gonna write mortgages. People were not, they had the financials to be able to own the homes, but they just couldn't get into contracts. Matter of fact, I know a couple, an interracial couple, probably in their early 80s now, but in the 60s, they had to go to somebody else to buy the house because they would not allow them to buy the house. That's here in Grand Rapids, that's not anywhere else. That's happening all across the country. We're talking about the 30s and moving into the 40s. Other new era laws that were out with the Federal Home Association around insurance and insurance rates, mortgage rates and things like that, kept people that had the means but would not legally be allowed to buy properties. Now we're moving into the 50s and 60s. We do have other laws that have come on. We have the civil rights movement that did dispel some of that, but obviously not totally all of that. We now have in Grand Rapids area, and I know I don't want to get to Eureka's points, but in Michigan, there's about a 34% gap in home ownership. It's about the same, it has been that way in Grand Rapids for almost as long as we measure back. Again, back on my trail, think about the GIs, go fight for the country. They're not, they go over into tour theaters in Asia and Europe, put their lives on the line, you talk about promises, promise this, that, and the other, and they're not able to do that. Fast forward to now, I mean, yes, I see my friend Nancy Haynes in the audience, thank you for being here. Fair Housing Act 68, which did help at least make things illegal officially after the institutionalization and federalization of housing discrimination. That was until 1977, the CRA, Community Reinvestment Act. Those are all things that part of the question is to, hey, what are some of the things that we did to try to alleviate that? Obviously, they have fallen short. There has been historic discrimination within housing across the country since we've been exceptionalized as a country. So after 100+ years of that, I mean, that puts us in a condition now to where I know Eureka will talk a little bit more about some of those disparities that do exist. We do, and I'll refer real quick to, when I say the Urban League, I'm talking about the movement. There's 92 other affiliates around the country, and we do have a national organization. A couple things that we would like to see, or am I getting ahead of it?
We're gonna go to policy solutions. After this, I'm gonna do just the first sort of questions, but believe me, we are getting to that. We're gonna go down to Eureka as well, but yeah.
So just to sum that up
That's
real
your
quick,
priorities, yeah.
is what makes it so bad is that when you see in black and white these maps, when you see black and white federal legislation that codify, put in the law, discrimination based on race of people being able to own a home, and we understand that our country is founded on ownership of real estate as a wealth accumulation tool, as the tool to be able to pursue happiness and all those type of things. It is just, I was going to say it's appalling, but I guess I did say it's appalling. So that's a little bit of how we got it.
It is, and it's remarkable to me. You know, we know how important policy, specifically federal policy, is to addressing disparities and inequality in housing, and how far we have come by outlawing it. And yet, when I sat at the State of the Union address 2 weeks ago and heard the president declare to the cheers of my Republican colleagues, DEI in this country is dead. And you know, what does that mean when you're quantifying DEI as housing policies that have discriminated against Black and brown communities, prevented them from getting homes, you know, redlining, discriminatory loan practices? You know, it makes me feel like, you know, a huge jolt backwards in time. So, you know, we acknowledge the progress, and I don't want to, you know, dampen the powerful comments that you made by bringing, you know, it back to the reality that we are facing. But that is, you know, that is a stark contrast to what we are seeing now in Washington and what we feel like we are up against, you know, pushing back against this reversion to acceptance at a federal policy level of discriminatory practices.
So, absolutely, it's almost like for us, I won't say Star Wars fans, Star Wars generation, it's like we're looking at the Death Star when we hear stuff like that come out of Washington. And it is a setback, it's a punch in the face. Again, so we have made some progress, but when the disparities of homeownership are still at 34%, I don't think that those policies that we tried to enact in 68 and 77 and so on and so forth have had much success. So,
Yuri, we'll move on to you. If you can provide just a brief overview of Housing Kent's work, and then I've got a follow-up question for you.
Thank you, by the way, for allowing us to participate in this conversation. And I say us because Housing Kent, it's our staff, our board, and more importantly, our community network of Housing Stability Alliance partners, 130 plus organizations and individuals that are working diligently and faithfully towards creating a county that really creates housing stability for all. One of the fundamental goals that we work towards is housing by choice. That means that we all believe that people should be able to choose the neighborhoods in which they live and be able to afford the choices that they make. And so that's the underlying premise of the network and our partners.
Awesome. We're in appropriations season right now, and in addition to the policies that we pass, right, zoning ordinances, where we can develop, big housing, permitting reform, the federal funding streams that we pass to the state of Michigan or organizations like Housing Kent, can you speak to how the instability of our appropriations process, is the government going to pass a budget? Are they not? Are we going to get our money? How that might impact your work at Housing Kent and the extent to which you rely on federal funds when they're cut and knowing how that's coming.
Yeah, so partnership with the federal government, I must underscore, is critical to housing stability for all. And let me say that again. Partnership with the federal government is critical to housing stability for all, because investment in housing not only supports housing, it supports economic mobility, it supports workforce development, it supports children doing well in school, it supports healthcare, it supports transportation. It really is the system of systems of the day, especially since we are in a present housing crisis. And I tell people all the time that if housing stability and investment in housing is not stabilized, if not increased, it's going to eclipse the outcomes in all of the other areas in which many people are doing great work in our community, because housing is just that integrated in success of all the safety net programs. If you think specifically about Kent County, we receive about $165 million of federal funds in housing on an annual basis. That represents about 55% of the overall public and philanthropic investment that's coming into our community. And so what that means is that any decline in investment will cut off our ability to create housing affordability for all. People will not be able to buy homes, especially if you're an aspiring first-time homeowner, young buyers, people who are hardworking, making the median wage or not. They will be priced out. They're already priced out, but they'll be further priced out of accessing the housing market, especially in a place that they would choose to live and feel that their family could be safe, so that when they're walking down the hallway in the middle of the night, they know that their kids aren't going to be hit by a stray bullet, or that the crime rate is low. I mean, which is important to so many families. The other thing that happens is renters, I believe Representative Scholten mentioned, they're already paying more than $400 a month that they can afford. And what people often don't correlate when it comes to affordability and rentership is that most of these households are working two jobs, if not 3 jobs, to even make ends meet. And so any disruption in federal funding will cause an upset in their ability to meet their monthly bills. So we're talking again about groceries, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about paying for the child care, we're talking about car repair, we're talking about medical bills. Any episode in federal funding, again, will have a ripple effect into everybody's household budget. And renters specifically, we have a heart for them at Housing Kent because like 1 out of 2 renter is actually cost burden in our community. And that's a substantive number. That's like tens of thousands of people that often remain invisible because they're not the homeowner, so you can't see the house that they're buying. They're kind of suffering silently with the threat of eviction prevention and homelessness, or they're doubling up and they're couching up, and so they're largely unseen. The other thing that I would say is if you're a business owner, whether it's a small business, a large business, medium-sized business, no matter what your industry, federal funding deficits are gonna have a ripple effect to your workforce. And what that means is workers are gonna show up with a cognitive load at your jobs and not be able to perform at the highest level of productivity that you desire. You will probably experience even greater degrees of instability in terms of workers showing up for work on time or workers quitting, especially for those who are earning lower wages, because it's just too much for people to handle. I was at the Econ Club the other day and the gentleman was talking about quiet cracking. And then I said, but he was talking about middle management, and my thought was, I think a whole lot of families are in quiet cracking. Like seriously, just because of the effects that have been languishing since COVID. And so what I just want to encourage you is
And the steady erosion of the middle class down into levels of poverty that we have never seen before. I mean, it's just, it's a reality, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Thank you. That is incredibly helpful. And we're gonna do a lightning round at the end of this, and I want you guys to say, it's hard to distill into one, but your top sort of 3 priorities or ideas for housing, and I know that's where you were going, Eric, and Eureka, you've got a lot as well. Jacob, if you can start out, provide just a brief, we wanna make sure we have time to get to the audience questions too, so just a brief overview of Dwelling Places work, and then I've got a follow-up for you. We hope most people are familiar with the incredible work that they do, but in case you're not.
Sure, thank you, Congresswoman, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. I'm Jacob Warner, I'm with Dwelling Place. We've been in Grand Rapids for 45 years, and we serve West Michigan by providing affordable housing, both rental, and we also have a community land trust that provides homeownership opportunities for low and moderate income families.
Thank you. I want to talk about renters versus owners and the unique challenges that are facing them, particularly here in West Michigan. So what are the challenges specific to renters versus owners? Again, I know this is probably a subject unto itself, but if you can give some top lines.
Sure, and I think in terms of owners, really where I think a lot of the burden is on potential owners, folks that would like to purchase a home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the U.S., it's been relatively easy for folks of moderate income to purchase a house, and that also becomes a primary wealth creation vehicle, as Eric was talking about, and we're not in that space anymore. You know, that's a pretty dramatic change. Now, I know that there's certainly been folks that have been marginalized along the way that, you know, certainly haven't had an opportunity, good opportunities, you know, for quite some time, but now we just have a lot of folks that the interest rates are extremely high, cost of building new housing is very high, and inventory is constrained. You have folks that have a 2.5% mortgage right now. They don't want to trade out of that. They don't want to sell their home because it'd be more expensive to buy another one. You also have folks that the net result of this also impacts the community, where you have communities where they have major employers that want to add jobs, but they can't find places for their folks to work. You also have school districts that, you know, maybe they're not having an issue right now, but if all the homes in their community are very expensive, there's no opportunity for young families to move in. And because our educational system is largely based off of per pupil, you're eventually going to deteriorate that school system over time if only rich older folks can afford to live there. So we really need to be able to be building new homes for home ownership, and we need to make it easier for folks to purchase homes. So that's some of the challenges that owners are having. Renters, I mean, they've been burdened for quite some time. We've seen, you know, rental rates continue to increase. I think, you know, during COVID, it kind of pulled back a little bit, but we've seen that, you know, kind of open back up, and we're seeing 4 or 5% increases every single year in some of the market rents. It's very difficult, and the rent, it's actually cheaper to own in a lot of ways. It's just people can't get a mortgage, and they can't find a house that is in their price range. So really where we see renters, just a lot of other costs have gone up as well. And so it just compounds that effect where you talked about the cost burden. What we mean by that is generally if somebody's paying more than 30% of their income towards their housing costs, that's considered rent burdened. And so the fact that we have half of the folks living in this county that are rent burdened, we have a real problem here. And it's only been compounding. So either we need to try to grow people's incomes, or we need to have the rents grow a little bit slower, or have some other housing options that are available for folks that are of more moderate income.
Thank you. Kevin, on to you. The important perspective as a builder and developer. Can you talk a little bit about your work in the community, not only at BDR, but just the incredible work that you do to help support affordable housing here?
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. And thank you for having this meeting, and just housing is such a key item right now, and appreciate your passion for it. So our company BDR, we build custom homes, we do remodeling, and we also build multifamily. So we do multifamily where we develop, build, and manage them. And so we kind of live in a couple spaces, doing custom and then just market rate apartments. And then lastly, our company is very passionate about serving the community. So we just finished up a capital campaign. My wife and I served on it and raised the team raised over $12 million for ICCF. So that'll be 100 homes. That'll be rentals. That'll be 100 homes that will be for sale on an affordable level. And it's really a lot of different things. Some of it is ICCF, is nonprofit, it's government, and it's market rate builders and developers. And there's not one element here. We all have to be working hard for that. So just some interesting facts. When I graduated from college in 1981, the median age for a first-time home buyer was 29. And today it's over 40. I think it's 40.5. So those are millennials that are buying their houses. And then you think that in some of, it's a whole spectrum where there's people with generational wealth that are buying their first house and good incomes. And then you layer in, people that have additional challenges, and it's like that 40 is not going to happen, and so it really is substantial. And so the shortage right now, the NHB says 1.2 million homes nationwide is what we're short. Fannie Mae says 4 million, and so it's a big number. And we have this in-migration thing in Michigan, which is a good thing. There's a lot of people moving here. Florida's losing people, and so to speak to what Brad was saying, it's kind of building on that. So, what do we do here? It's supply and demand. We need more supply, and you're dealing with the federal level, the state level, and the municipal. And I'll just speak quickly to those. When our country was developed in the 1700s, they started with townships, and they were 6 miles by 6 miles. So you end up with all these townships, all these different ordinances, and there's just not a real scalable thing to bring to each township. Everybody thinks differently on what apartment should be, how tall, how wide, how big. And I'll kind of set aside Grand Rapids because I think they embrace density. They really get it, and they say density is good. But virtually every other township just can't handle it. They don't want it. And you think about that, just one residential lot could probably have 3 or 4 townhouses, and it's going to hit the market better. It's going to be less expensive, but townhouses just are not approved very often. And this is a nationwide thing. And I'll just give 2 quick examples. One is East Grand Rapids. They're planning to do some condos there, higher density. And there's a project that I actually spoke in favor of. It was a developer from out of state that was looking to do a parcel in Centennial Park. And it's just a parcel that's been sitting there for 40 years, a bunch of older office buildings around it. And he wanted to do high density, and it totally made sense. And Cascade just said, nope, if we do that, it's gonna happen other places. And you think about that, that is 400 houses that would get built. There'd be people in the move down market that would free up 400 homes in this community. And it just, just doesn't get anywhere. And so, and if you think about inflation, we're all dealing with it. And shelter is 36% of inflation. And for many of us that own houses, it's probably not that number. But for that person that is renting, it's a big number. If we have a fixed mortgage, no big deal. So the municipalities need to start embracing density. And when we meet with them, we just tell them, you're putting a big tax on the next generation. If you don't want to increase density, you need to know that this next generation is going to be paying a lot. And right now, it's sad, but it's 16.4% of 25 to 34-year-olds are living at home. And it's a housing emergency, and the municipalities just don't get it. They just kind of chuggle along with the same thing. So, what are the good things that are happening? I would say, the brownfields and the TIFs that are available to give developers a chance, that's good. On the bad side, they just need to fix density. On a state level, when we're doing multi-family, the TIFs, the brownfield credits, just can take it from a marginal project to this works. On the difficult side with the state is, we have Eagle, and they're protecting the land, and they can they just don't care if it takes a year.
No, it's okay. Listen, I'm an environmentalist, but the number one thing that we hear from people is that it is just impossible. And Eagle and EPA at the federal level, that it feels like they have no incentive to get to yes, and they start with no. And that can be so frustrating. And, we hear that from across the board. I wonder, if you can share, and maybe you're getting there in your remarks, from soup to nuts, what would you identify as maybe the most challenging part or the most expensive part of actually building housing, getting new construction off the ground? You're starting to reference it, but as we go through the sort of best policy solutions that help us identify.
It was interesting, this afternoon I was walking out the door and I said to my estimator, and I told him what we're doing, and I said, what do you think it is? He goes, it is entitlements. And that's really it. And we are just, and it's kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts. On our multifamily, the new code says, oh, you need to have a pop-up plug in your island. You can't put a plug on the side of the island. And so, it's $300. And so we have to spend, if we want to put, the industry is like, hey, we can sell these, we're going to make a lot of money. A regular plug is $7. We're going to sell these, and who wants to have one in their house? So there's a few $100s there, and it's like, we need a GFI on the dryer. And it's just all these little costs. And the state of Michigan, is not our friend here. And just, some of their new ordinance just says, you need to wrap your house with 2 inches of foam on the outside. And, your DTE bill's gonna be, yeah, but how you put siding on a foam house? Yeah, and there's just the building sciences are totally disregarded. So no real, and there's, I would say a couple other things, what needs to happen. One is a lot of our workforce is, they're from, south of the border, and we need to keep ICE out of here. Because our construction workforce is if things keep going like they are, we're not gonna have a construction workforce. And then housing is gonna go up, even more.
Even more exponentially. We'll come back down this way, and then Jacob, do you want to touch on what you think, one or two, and then we'll go to Eureka and Eric with the urban league's policy priorities.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is structural, and so it's not easy to solve, but the way our system is set up with entitlements and approvals in this country is the developer has to win at every stage. So when you're going for site plan approval, when you're going for a tax abatement, when you're going for permitting, you have to clear every single hurdle, and somebody opposing that project only needs to win once to block you. So it's just the way that system is set up, it's kind of adversarial instead of collaborative, and what are the issues. So when we go do the development, we're very intentional about community engagement, but we're kind of set up for that. We have professionals on staff that are very good at going in and being able to speak to the neighbors and understand their concerns and work to try to address them, but a lot of developers don't have that. And so it's just, they get into a public approval, like what you were talking about in East Grand Rapids, and they just hit a wall because the community buy-in isn't there. So that is kind of a structural problem. The other issue is, each community, you talk about townships, are kind of advocating for their own interests and not really thinking about the interests of the whole. I know there was a bill that came out talking about trying to open up some of the zoning regulations so that ADUs were more easily be able to get approved, as well as changing minimum lot sizes. All these things would help more housing to get built, but Michigan Municipal League and all the townships went crazy. So they're certainly going to oppose that bill. So I don't know where that's going to go with the state, but overall, we build about half as much housing per capita in this country than we did 50 years ago. And it's been that way for quite some time. And it's now just catching up to us. This is a very long-term thing. This is a problem that, folks that work in housing have seen this for a while. It's been a housing crisis for a while, but we haven't really gotten the public attention to it till now. Now we have a lot of folks, understanding that it's a problem, and we're paying, that bill is coming due that has been building up for the last 20 or 30 years. So it's not going to be a snap your fingers type of solution either. This is going to be a long-term thing that we're all going to have to collaborate on how we fix this problem and how we build more housing efficiently in this country.
Heard, and again, though this is the first of its kind in a conversation, this is not the last of conversations around this. But the comments here, I think, really speak to the need for action, and that's exactly what we're trying to do in Washington, Eureka.
From Housing Kent's perspective, remember, we work across the entire housing stability continuum, which includes homelessness response, prevention, as well as supply. So I will give you 3 policies and then one kind of through line. One policy, for example, in homelessness response, we really need to transform Medicaid billing so that it can support permanent supportive housing, specifically supportive solutions. And supportive solutions are those wraparound services for individuals in our community, our neighbors who might need a little extra assistance in terms of being able to secure and get their housing. In the middle of the prevention space, dare I say, without making people nervous, probably something about some renter stabilization policies. The price of rent is just going up astronomically, and most families, like I mentioned before, can't afford rent. So is there a way to kind of force the market to cool in order for us to be able to secure housing for people that are struggling with eviction prevention? On the supply side, it's always zoning. It's zoning reform. The majority of our county community is not zoned for the type of housing that we need. It's easy for certain individuals to show up at Planning Commission and upend really good projects, as Kevin had mentioned. And so we just need to find a way to do that. And then I think a through line through it all has to be fair housing enforcement. It's not the enactment of the legislation that's the issue, it's the enforcement and investing resources into that enforcement so that we really can have a housing system that's as discrimination-free as possible.
And the rent stabilization, rental caps, most of the time that happens at a local, a city, a county level. Though I will say the Road to Affordable Housing Act is really targeting a lot of those issues by, one of the main pieces of legislation, or one of the main, policy priorities of this legislation is to stop large investors from coming in, purchasing single family homes, jacking up the prices. We see this across West Michigan, And, again, bipartisan bill already passed the Senate. We need the speaker to put it on the House floor and get it done. While it wouldn't be, a rental freeze, it would really, get at one of the main things that is, driving a lot of rental prices, as well as keeping renters from purchasing that first home. So, Eric, last but certainly not least.
So what I didn't mention earlier is that a little bit of brief history of how we got here with the disparities.
Yeah.
What I want to hit home is that where we are today did not happen by happenstance. It was designed that way. When I'm talking about disparities, the affordability piece, and if it can be designed one way, it can be redesigned one way. Get the same people around the table that I talked about earlier and redesign it. To that extent, supply obviously is definitely a big part of the equation. I don't want to discount the supply. Real quickly though, we need to shift from units produced, and this is for Congress and federal government, to shift from units produced to affordability, permanence, and equity. In a few bullet points, incentivize permanent affordability, such things as community land trusts, as we have down the panel there, limited equity cooperatives, tie federal subsidies to anti-displacement outcomes. Why this matters is because, yes, affordable housing is affecting everybody, regardless of color, but it does disproportionately affect those that have been marginalized and left out of the system for all this time. We also need to modernize federal place-based investment tools, reform opportunity zones, pilot community investment funds, but more importantly, make new market tax credits permanent. Those are tools that have been successful. And the bottom line, housing affordability is not about how much we build, although that is a big part of the equation, but who controls the land, how long that affordability lasts, and whether investment strengthens or destabilizes communities.
Thank you. Thank you. We're bringing you to Washington. I'm going to send everybody, get my colleagues, and you can solve this in an afternoon. We are so glad. I look out in this audience and I'm like, everyone should be up here. Everyone should be up here speaking to this. So we want to turn it over for some questions. We've got about 15, 20 minutes for some back and forth, and we'll take start over here.
Hi, excuse me, my name is Jonathan Bradford, and I have appreciated all the observations about the cost of housing and the cost of homeownership. There's a really big issue that I think you, Congresswoman, can take back to Washington, and that has to do with the disparity between how we subsidize homeownership, but we don't have an equal sort of treatment to the rental market. We know that an increasing number of people can only afford to rent, and we also know that rent levels are exploding. As a homeowner, any of us who are here who are homeowners, we get to deduct mortgage interest and property taxes from our income. That is a huge subsidy for us as homeowners. And for most of us, well, it's really nice, but it doesn't really make that huge a difference.
Yeah.
I would love to see, and have been advocating this for all of my many years in housing, that we get some equity on this matter. Low-income housing tax credit, which many of us know how to use and have used very successfully, doesn't come near to quote-unquote costing the federal government as much as the home ownership deduction does.
Right.
We should change that.
I thank you for the comment, and I think we've got we have Section 8, we have other programs for renters, but you are right, it's not nearly to the same extent that we subsidize and give benefits to home ownership. I think there is a sound policy reason for prioritizing federal dollars towards home ownership. It is an incredible wealth generator for families, and incentivizing folks to want to get to home ownership has been the priority. However, right, we are in an unsustainable affordability crisis, right? Where that is not going to be a reality for so many. But I think that the problem that lawmakers or Republican or Democratic administration has is sort of acknowledging okay, there is going to be a permanent class of renters that we need to spend additional federal dollars to subsidize, wouldn't those dollars better be spent in subsidizing even more home ownership, right, or getting more homes on the market? But again, I think that this comes from a misguided notion that there is a limited pie. If the president can find $50 billion to start a new war with Iran, I think we can find some more money for housing affordability here in West Michigan.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that question, and I saw a statistic, and I need to back it up, but I was at the multifamily conference, and they said that 60% of the renters over the next 5 years will be 65 to 85 years of age. So you know, it's really, we need to do this for our seniors.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. And, you know, when we are, the More Homes on the Market Act, you know, where we want to incentivize our baby boomers and generation and beyond to sell those single family homes, get them on the market, allow them to take that tax credit. You know, many people are gonna say, well, I don't wanna own a home anymore. You know, I wanna be a little bit more flexible. So that's a great point, Kevin. Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, Congresswoman, and thank you for hosting this conversation. Really appreciate it. My name is Eric Pratt, and I just have a question to the panel related to the concept of regional fair share of affordable housing units. When we talk about supply and expansion in the consumption of housing, generally when a consumer's going to the marketplace to purchase a home, the access to MLS. Generally, MLS is going to have housing that has been listed from one or even more counties within the metropolitan area. However, we look at where affordable housing, where the local housing tax credit program can be deployed and used and enabled, is generally limited to only a handful of communities within that metropolitan area. So my question to the panel is, what are you guys currently engaged in, or in terms of broadening that scope and really encouraging communities within the metropolitan area with this issue of affordable housing to promote a fair share of affordable housing within the region?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, you know, part of that is driven by MSHDA, and kind of they put a lot of thought into how those credits get allocated, but it's really hard for them to write uniform rules for everybody that, you know, wouldn't favor one area over another. And so, you know, I think part of it is trying to create enough tools that can be used in different areas. But also there's a lot of education as well, because it's not, when we do a housing tax credit deal, it's not just we have to get emissions approval, we have to get the local government's approval, we have to get community support. So there's a lot of education that we typically have to do if a community hasn't used that subsidy before. So so developers will tend to do the things, the path of least resistance, right? So if we've worked a lot in the community and they love us and they know what we're trying to do, it's much easier than trying to break through that educational barrier. So I do think that there's a lot of work that Michigan can be doing to build that education and to build awareness about what low-income housing is, because I think it gets painted with a big stigma. And there's a lot of different types of affordable housing as well, some of which are totally different than others. So Michigan has done, I think, a decent job of trying to form regional partnerships that they've kind of broken the state into a couple different areas, and there's different folks that serve on those boards. So I guess, I think that's kind of how we have to work through that, is to bring that up through the grassroots a little bit and bring it to those regional partnerships that can go to Michigan and say, hey, we're not getting enough, you know, of our fair share over in this part of the state. And really lobby Michigan that way, because that's how changes get made. Is the state housing authority really has the reins on how that stuff gets spread around. So I think that's the best way to go about it, is for us to do some advocacy.
Especially given, you know, this is the second highest, you know, unaffordable housing region in the entire state. It seems like, you know, proportionately, we should make sure that we're getting our fair share. We'll look into as well, you know, federally, when we're sending federal dollars, what we can do to make sure that the states are appropriating the, you know, the relatively exceptional amount of affordable housing based on federal dollars flowing into the state as well. It's something, nobody's brought up before, so I'm glad you raised it. We can
raised
do
it.
that.
The state of New Jersey, they have a policy where each community within the metro area must take their fair share of affordable housing units within that metropolitan region.
Yeah.
That's a policy decision that I think, it comes down from the state.
Yeah.
Not too much dissimilar to what you see legislative communities in Michigan, related to zoning and permittal housing as well.
It's a good comment, thank you.
Hi, Dave Polkowski with Disability Advocates of Kent County and a resident of your district, and honored to be served by you, represented by you. Thank you. Easy ask. I hope you can accomplish this tonight. No, it is. Jonathan, don't laugh. Please stop saying subsidize affordable housing when we need to invest in affordable housing. We invest in all kinds of stuff, like foreign military actions, but we subsidize poor people. And a lot of poor people are people with disabilities. And they're not those people, they're our family, friends, and neighbors. So easy word change. The harder one, older adult housing modification program. It's in the HUD budget. I'll send the details to you. We were actually one of the first 30 recipients across the nation. Small grant, 30 across the entire country. We actually were featured in the HUD's national magazine, rocked it, because it's awesome people. It's not me, it's also people that work at Disability Advocates. Last year, 458 people got a home assessment by us. A third of those folks, 150, would be in a nursing home or assisted care, but for our help. The change that's needed, and I hope you can commit to working on that change, is that you have to be 62 and up. Kevin, that is you and me. When you said, like, our seniors, no, it's us seniors, but okay, we'll talk. Anyways, that being said, what that additional investment in, and it needs to be uncapped for the age on the bottom side, because I am not joking. It takes a part of my staff's soul when they get a 50-year-old person with a disability and there's nothing out there, maybe a little bit of CDBG, but then they make a little bit too much and then you can't do it. So I could go on, but Catherine's gonna give me the hug.
No, this is fantastic. And if you have one more thing, keep going, but I was about to say, make sure, we're getting these as well, and then we'll come to you, and I was gonna call you out anyways, Jim, if you didn't raise your hand, so. I was like, I know you have ideas.
For folks for somebody who will go nameless in the room, is really put meat on elevator reform. Because it's our fault that we have elevators in so many buildings, but America, our elevators cost like 2 times more than this place called Europe. And they're built in the same factories in Germany. So is elevator reform on your radar, and what can we do to help? What? Right to Repair Act? No, that's the right to repair everything, not just elevators.
Not just elevators.
Smartphones, refrigerators.
John
Deere tractors, sorry.
The elevator thing actually is, but thank you for raising it again, so, We're going to bang it and then Dave, or Jim, sorry. Sorry, Jim. Said with love.
Well, at 62 years is an old age, then it must be a dinosaur. Thank you, Representative Scholten. I guess I just have a comment. I think we're missing out on a resource that if we could tap into and allow them to be a part of the solution, I think we can at least increase the opportunity for addressing the affordable housing crisis, which is the small business developers. I'm one of them, never been in it before, and I thought, well, this should be pretty attainable, but it isn't. And so the project that we're on, and I'm very proud of our investment group, is a Mexican, an Indian, an Asian, and hopefully we'll be adding on an African American in the next few weeks. I think that it seems to me that what I'm learning is that unless you're really wealthy or a large developer, It's tough. It's very difficult. When I read the Craze magazine and a story about, a large project in the city of Grand Rapids, and the state just gave them almost 70% coverage on tax incentives and abatements. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong. All I'm saying is I want the same thing, and we can't get it.
Yeah.
We get denied because one of the grants we get denied is because you're too small.
Yeah.
So I think if we can tap into the entrepreneurial spirit of our nation, and we can give opportunities for small developers like myself to contribute to this, then I think that is an asset that we may not have tapped into, and I hope we can do so.
That's a great point. Thank you. Yes, I'm gonna clap for that too. Thank you.
Brevity is not my gift, so I wrote my notes down. My name is Jim Davis, and I'm grateful to be here tonight for the talent on stage. I work at Family Promise in West Michigan. My comments are rooted in a question, and forgive me for this big epilogue. West Michigan is proud of the collaborative nature of our nonprofit housing providers and the relationships we share. In no small part, that is due to wonderful backbone efforts from agencies like the Urban League and like Housing Ken. We celebrate the efforts of affordable and market rate developers like Dwelling Place and BDR working alongside one another. However, the last 10 years of local efforts to create efficiencies through interagency collaboration feels directly under attack. Housing providers are spending thousands of dollars to scrub websites, marketing materials, to eliminate racial disparities from their sought outcomes. Changes to the Coalition of Care, notices of funding from the federal administration is hurting the most vulnerable of our neighbors who have been completely thrown into chaos. Family Promise of West Michigan sees more and more full-time and dual-income households seeking shelter. I'm nervous what the next chapter of housing will look like, with anticipated cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. Working class families with children will be the first to fall into homelessness, as rent and mortgage payments are reallocated to both medical costs and food. Even our governor's state of the state seems to be moving resources from those living at and below poverty to the missing middle. $300,000 new builds, which are very necessary, will not alleviate the current needs of our current residents. It feels like we're more focused on talent acquisition and incentives, which we support, for market rate developers, rather than addressing the households with the greatest needs. And here's my question. How can we move from new homes for new talent to help us make magazine covers, to the less sexy effort to create attainable housing for people with limited income and unique circumstances? Are we building Grand Rapids for Grand Rapidians, or for a select handful of companies and institutions who are hoping to sweep those stories under the rug and out of downtown to recruit more households who will add pressure to the system?
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I'm gonna clap for that too. My visit to Family Promise was hands down one of the most impactful that I have done in all the years. It's only 3, but still, we do a lot of visits, hundreds every year. The work that you do, your knowledge of this problem is just a real gift to this city. And I think you're the perfect closing comment here, because we are, this is why we're having this conversation, because as we are seeing incredible growth, which, as you said, we are supporting, we are also seeing companies moving here and saying, but the median level worker that we want to bring with us cannot afford a home. This is not about permanently homeless individuals, trying to buy their first home even, right? It's about this constant erosion of the middle class. You and I talked about when we were there, I mean, you credit for the idea, but if we are going to criminalize homelessness, if we are going to address homelessness as a national security issue, let's find funding from the national security budget to address homelessness and housing needs here in West Michigan. So these are the types of solutions that I am looking to. I want to turn it to our panel to comment or respond if they want to.
I think the comments that you made are spot on, because it goes to the fact that, again, there has to be a comprehensive set of solutions. And oftentimes people anchor in one camp or another camp and not look across the full spectrum of housing and housing needs. And so we do need market rate housing because we do know that the middle class is eroding. But that doesn't take away to the fact that we also need housing at the lower ends of the market. And quite frankly, it doesn't pencil out for developers, which then gets back to the need for more federal policies or tax incentives or types of assistance programs, even if it's just housing choice vouchers, whatever they may be, to support the middle, or to support the lower income earning households, because apart from federal government intervention, we will repeatedly fail at meeting their housing needs. And the way the system is set up now, even if you're a renter, you can't even move from one apartment to another apartment because it doesn't exist in your price range. Or if you are trying to move from one apartment to another apartment, they have these ridiculous rules in place. It's almost like the policy du jour, where they'll tell you that in order for you to acquire our apartment, you have to give us, your down payment assistance and all that other stuff and move in within a 2-week window. If you don't move in within that 2-week window, then you're gonna have to either pay rent on an empty apartment and or end up defaulting on rent in your current apartment in order to move in that apartment. And I can only say that this is true because I'm a renter when I moved here and they were telling me that nonsense. And I was like, well, I need to see that policy in writing, and they could produce it in writing, but essentially there's no place for people to exercise upward mobility if you're moving from extremely low income to low income or low income to moderate. That type of housing stock just does not exist in our community at the level that it is to exist, and we do not have the federal assistance and the subsidies to meet the demand, and it is growing. And one indicator that we know that it's growing is homelessness is increasing. And when homelessness increases, because something upstream has broken. And what's broken, again, is that low to mod part of the market, not necessarily the lowest part or the highest part.
If I could just add one thing to that, I think to do affordable housing, and when I say affordable, it's 60% AMI or below, 80% AMI or below, whatever it is, to do that at scale, you need federal subsidy. It is impossible to make anything work without some type of federal dollars because that's where the real money is. I mean, there's some state resources out there and those can supplement certain things, those can plug your gap, but you need to have federal government involvement to make some of this stuff work. And that, brings a lot of strings attached to it. And the more strings that are attached, the harder the work is. And another thing that creates a lot of problems, or has created a lot of problems lately, is state capacity at HUD and at some of the other federal agencies. They are a mess right now. I mean, we can't get them to just do normal business. It's like you have to beg to get them to just sign a renewal contract, for your Section 8 buildings, even though that's been a thing that's been relatively automatic. It's just, you need to have an attorney that can call the right person and get in contact. And I know, certainly that's not the only way to go about it, but it's just become so much more difficult. And so I'm really excited about the fact that Congresswoman is supporting these different federal incentives that will bring more dollars. But I did advise, I really think we need to make sure that the administration is obligated to allocate those resources and staff their agencies so that we can get people to pick up the phone when we need to work through these very difficult topics.
Thank you. Yep. Last comment.
Real quick, I'll jump in. If you think about what David just said and what Congresswoman said about DEI is dead, think about it. HUD was created coming out of civil rights. But let's not forget, civil rights was just not about black folks, which it was, but it's about poor people as well. So when they're taking these measures to affect these outcomes on a certain group of people, they're hurting other people as well. And that does exacerbate the problem. So these solutions, again, if we can find these solutions, I think we are able to help, again, the class of people that they are trying to eliminate. I'll just lift up two things real quick. Being, I love what you're saying. I think there's ways we can find. If there's ways we can do small scale scattered site, I think there's economies of scale that we can get to do those things. And Jonathan, I was listening to a panel on housing, and they we incentivize, builders will do what is incentivized. If there's ways we can incentivize on a national level, builders to do that missing middle, and find a way to do that, I think that we will be able to find that missing middle, and we know that will trickle down, that would help some of the lower levels. But people will do what they're incentivized to do through the tax code.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to have to head immediately out. We've got a Zoom briefing on some other events happening halfway around the world, so I will have to head straight there. But I really want to thank you all so much for taking the time to engage. My team, please raise your hand where they're around. If you need, thank you to everyone for putting this on. Please make sure, if you haven't already, get their contact information. If you have additional thoughts, questions, concerns, please reach out to us. This type of engagement is the only way that I can do my job of being an effective representative, is hearing from you and taking these ideas back to Washington. Thank you. Thank you so much.